This session is about greenwashing, or the so-called false solutions. We'll start with a very blunt statement. Greenwashing is like putting lipsticks on a pig. So you can use lipsticks, you can try some makeup, still it is a pig. So it doesn't change the nature so much of what we are discussing. First off, let's go with definitions. How may greenwashing be defined? And we picked on the definition of the Cambridge Dictionary that says greenwashing is making people believe that your company is doing more for the environment than it really does. But there are different types of greenwashing, and we will see a list in next slides. The problem is that greenwashing is becoming more and more tricky. They are trying to use new tools, new ways of misleading people into thinking you are greener than what you actually are. And this pertains particularly to some of the issues we are dealing with, such as plastics and related management. We can see here some basic examples of greenwashing so that it helps us better define the boundaries of greenwashing and related uses. Greenwashing may be related to the use of words such as natural, organic. Of course, this is attractive to people because they are misled into thinking that something labeled as natural or organic is more sustainable, it's better for the environment or for your health. It may use visuals, typically the green color. Green color is always drawing attention to environmental protection, or using flowers, nature, and so on and so forth. Or greenwashing may show or put focus on only green activities of a given company, often very marginal, very trivial, while it hides the dark side of the moon, the polluting activities of the same company. It may consider the tailored specific green labels, which are easy to meet, but basically they don't show any environmental sustainability or any better performance vis-a-vis environmental sustainability. Or it may refer to some irrelevant activities, such as saying, yeah, we hold up to environmental regulations, but that's a mandate. So basically it does not make you better than the others. Or claims without any proof, lies, and so on. Saying, yeah, I'm able to do this and to do that, I found a solution, but there is no evidence, no proof of that. Examples about greenwashing are by now widespread. This is a typical example of greenwashing related to misuse of words. What does it mean 100% natural when it comes to a soda? I'm pretty sure you concur that there is no meaning whatsoever of that. Now, if we move now to an area which is of high interest to us, such as plastic issues, plastic management, and so on and so forth, there are recurring news out there on the international media that there was a fancy solution. One of the latest ones was the plastic-eating worms. Typically, they are very high on the media for a few days or for a few weeks, and then they tend to disappear. But unfortunately, all such news are misleading people into thinking that we can keep using plastics at the current pace or even at a higher degree of consumption, because solutions will be there available in the near future, which is not the case. So let's start with one of the best examples of false solutions and greenwashing: incineration. Incineration is never a solution for waste management. Definitely, it is what we call an end-of-the-pipe solution, Because once you have got an incinerator, you need waste to feed into it in order to ensure the payback of the capital expenditures. And so this creates what we call the lock-in effect. So where incinerators are, zero waste programs are slowed down, separate collection and recycling program and reuse programs are stopped or slowed down. So this is why we are basically fighting incineration. Anyway, there are different greenwashing types around incineration. One of the most diffused ones is energy recovery. They call it waste to energy. But actually, energetic efficiency is very, very disappointing. I would say appallingly disappointing. If you produce electricity, it is around 20%, and it is likely to be much lower in Asia on account of the much higher percentage of food scraps in municipal solid waste, which keeps the calorific value much lower. Only district heating may increase the energetic efficiency because besides electricity, you would also use heat. But heat is to no use in most of the global south. There is no district heating network in many of the countries. And so we may basically call it a waste of energy, not a waste to energy. Also, we have to consider that energetic production is being decarbonized because there is a higher and higher reliance on renewables. This means that incineration is replacing less and less oil and coal and more solar and wind. So this means that in the future, incineration will make even less sense than it does now. But unfortunately, an incinerator is not made to last for 1 day or 1 week. Once the incinerator is there, it will last for 20 or 30 years. And so in its operational life, its energy will become less and less sensible because it would replace solar and wind energy. Also, we have to consider that with circular economy strategies, zero waste programs, the amounts of residual waste are getting smaller. They are dwindling. And therefore, there is a competition between incineration and the agenda as defined by circular economy, zero waste, and so on and so forth. For instance, in Europe, the European communication of January 2017 about waste to energy exposed the lock-in problem and called for defunding incineration because it said basically we have got a circular economy agenda whereby we want to maximize recovery of materials, and at some point this will compete with the installed capacities for incineration. Also, very often they say, yeah, but with incineration we may minimize landfilling, the percentage of waste which is sent to landfilling. Okay, let's consider it bluntly. We are not landfilling percentages, we are landfilling tonnages and kilograms. In order to make a solid example, would you feel fuller after eating 10% of a cake or 100% of a biscuit? Certainly 10% of a cake makes you fuller than 100% of a biscuit. And the same happens with municipal solid waste and related percentages. A percentage of what? Of which tonnage? Go to a specific example with this comparison. This compares on the left-hand side a situation based on high reliance on incineration. Denmark, which is touted as a very advanced country when it comes to municipal solid waste management, and it has a very high reliance on incineration. Well, they are producing 780 kilograms per person and year of municipal solid waste, 52% of which is incinerated, which means a staggering amount of more than 400 kilograms per person and year of incinerated waste. 25% of these is turned into slags and ashes, which means that more than 100 kilograms per person and year still requires some sort of landfilling, some sort of disposal. On the right-hand side, we have got a zero waste situation, such as the Pontarina district, Treviso province in northeastern Italy. They are producing as little as 350 kilograms per person and year municipal solid waste. 85% of that is recycled, so residual waste is as little as 50 kilograms per person and year. And since they have got no incinerator, no lock-in, and so they may keep working on circular economy and zero waste programs, they are committed to further reduce residuals by a further 80% in the next few years, so going down to 10 kilograms per person and year. So in terms of kilograms and tonnages, who is actually minimizing landfilling? Unfortunately, an incinerator causes lock-in, and therefore it will keep producing high amounts of municipal solid waste, which in turn translates into high amounts of slugs and ashes from incinerators to be landfills. Another area for greenwashing, which is becoming unfortunately increasingly popular, at least on the media, chemical recycling. And this is a very aggressive strategy in Asia right now. This is encompassing actually different technologies with diverging goals. Basically, three groups of technologies: solvent-based purification, solvolysis, and thermal cracking, gasification, which is nothing else than incineration in this case. In Europe, this is worded as non-conventional thermal treatment, and it's covered by the Incineration Directive, just as incineration is. The first two groups of technologies, solvent-based purification and solvolysis, may lead to what we call plastic to plastic, may be helpful to recover some polymers, clean polymers, to be then repolymerized into new plastics, and so they reduce the need for virgin polymers. In this respect, it may be helpful. The problem is, it's only a handful of sites with very small capacities, and it's not solid yet. We don't have full insights into economic performances, environmental performances, operational performances, mass balances, toxic outputs, and so on and so forth. So we cannot rely on them 100%. The third group, thermal cracking or gasification, is nothing more, nothing less than waste to energy in this case, because it's aimed at producing basically fuels. In the European Waste Framework Directive, worth noticing that production of fuels is never and will never be considered as recycling. And so there is a misuse of the term chemical recycling. We bring this up every other day, and we say you cannot call it chemical recycling if it is producing fuels. Anyway, there are very good documents which have been produced by Gaia. There is a link, I provide you with a link. And here we have got a wonderful infographic which plots the two types of chemical recycling. As you can see, chemical recycling is conflating, is bundling plastic to plastic and plastic to fuel. But they are very diverging from each other in terms of the intended goal, which is on the one hand reproducing plastics, and on the other hand producing fuels. So plastic to fuel is very much more similar to incineration than to recycling. And given that plastic to plastic is still not solid yet, as I was telling you, we don't have solid figures on economic performances, operational performances, environmental performances, the amount of outputs, whether they are toxics or not. Still, it is not fully reliable. So for the moment, I would say, let's forget about it. Now, the last part of my presentation is about plastics. What are corporations saying? Plastics are a great field for greenwashing and for false solutions. Well, most of the false claims by corporations relate to recyclability or reusability of plastics. There are the so-called voluntary pledges. For instance, a very common pledge is we are targeting 100% of our plastics to be made reusable or recyclable or compostable by a certain deadline. This is becoming very common. But the problem is, recyclable or reusable or compostable does not mean it will be actually recycled or reused or composted. Between reusability and recyclability and real reuse and recycling, there is collection, which is missing in many parts of the world. That's one of the problems. There is the reusing and recycling infrastructure. There is the possibility of the market to absorb a certain type of polymers. So all of these makes the recycling strategy largely imperfect. So we cannot trust 100% recyclability. This will not turn into 100% recycled. So what are the main roads in order to target the plastic problems? First of all, we have to reduce and avoid as much as possible. Consider bans and restrictions. This may already be done at local level with the municipal ordinances. There's many ordinances included in Asia. For instance, in the Philippines, there's many municipalities where plastic bags bans were adopted, or other plastic bans. We may consider charging in order to discourage the use of single-use plastics. We have to call on the companies to redesign for reuse or replacement in the near future. Then we have to consider collection connected to recycling and reuse. For instance, DRS, deposit return schemes, are a great tool in order to maximize collection. And also, not only to maximize the quantity, but also to improve the quality of what is being collected, because it will target a specific material. For instance, bottles, plastic bottles. So once you have got only PET bottles, it's much easier to have upcycling, bottle to bottle, instead of bottle into something else, which would be downcycling. So recycling might be considered for high-value plastics such as PP, PET, HDPE, and this should include the important role of informal recyclers. Curbside collection for all packaging plastics, also including the hard-to-recycle ones, because this relates to the concept of extended producer responsibility. We have to give the burden back to the packaging producers so that they consider redesigning for better reusability, recyclability, or durability, so that we reduce the use of plastics. And this should include also the hard-to-recycle plastics, otherwise they just forget about the problem. We may also consider some downcycling only as a midterm solution for hard-to-recycle plastics. For instance, the so-called mixed low-grade heterogeneous plastics, which are basically the plastic films, the crispy packets, the candy wrappers, and so on and so forth. We may consider locally some downcycling. There are many such schemes around the world, such as Precious Plastics, Conceptos Plásticos. This is not the best solution, but still it may give us a transitional tool in order to address the problem. And we say we always have to assess it against the most likely alternative in that given context. If the most likely alternative is a dump site, which gets on fire every other week, it's better downcycling. But if we have got better solutions, such as already a well-established EPR scheme, which triggers redesigning, or the possibility to implement a DRS and something like that, so we may switch to better solutions. For instance, new business models with reusable containers for takeaway food. There are such business models which are being diffused around the world. It's a product as a service. They call it product as a service. So instead of selling you the material, they rent it out to you. You can give it back and you get your deposit back. And that's great because the container will be washed and used again for a further use. So the last bit of my presentation will be on so-called bioplastics. First of all, let me be blunt. They are not a solution to marine litter, nor a solution to litter as a whole. They are not designed to degrade in the environment. We prefer discussing compostable plastics to draw attention to the fact that they may only be considered if connected to separate collection of the organics going to a composting site. Also, there is some confusion between bio-based and biodegradable. Bioplastics, encompass both terms, both wordings. bio-based and biodegradable, but bio-based is totally different. Bio-based means based on renewable materials, so it is related to sourcing, and there are other types of problems such as GMOs, land grabbing, and so on. Whereas biodegradable refers to end-of-life behavior and management. So we only consider a subset of biodegradable because we do not want them to degrade in the open environment, because it's so uncertain. It depends on so many factors, exposures to sunlight, temperature, physical conditions, and so on and so forth. We only want to consider compostable plastics. We've got solid and reliable standards for compostable plastics. I will share with you in a while what those standards are, and they should always be considered, not to be misled into falsely claimed biodegradable or compostable plastics, but the use cannot be widespread, only in specific cases. For instance, for separate collection of bio-waste and going to industrial composting, and only when reusable is. For instance, across the world, there is a diffused adoption of compostable bags in order to increase participation in separate collection systems for food scraps, including large cities. This is working pretty well. It has been used for a long time in many countries, such as the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, Norway, and so on and so forth. It is not only accepted, but even promoted by the composting industry in order to increase captures and improve the quality of food scraps. Otherwise, people would use normal plastic bags, which would be detrimental to the quality of compost. But if you use compostable bags, you maximize captures and improve the quality. These are the standards. There are reliable standards across the world. Always check whether those standards were considered. If those standards, if there is no labeling which refers to those standards, distrust whomever tells you, hey, I have got a very cheap compostable bag for separate collection of food scraps, consider this one instead of using the other ones which have been certified. No, distrust it. Always ask for materials certified according to these. Anyway, as I already told you, and this is the key point, a widespread use to replace single-use plastics should and will never be considered. We have to fight it. What may be the issues with that? A higher confusion in the system. People will be basically confused. Is it compostable? Is it ordinary plastics? So if they are given packaging which is depending from time to time compostable or ordinary plastic, we will have problems with cross-contamination. So there will be ordinary plastics getting into composting sites and the other way around, compostable plastics going to mechanical recycling, and this would be detrimental to both processes. But above all, from an environmental standpoint, this is not sustainable because compostable plastics are still single-use plastics. And so there is a better option, which is durability and reuse, other materials which may be reused again and again and again. And it's still resource intensive and wasteful. So let's only consider them as tools connected to separate collection and heading to composting sites. Also, watch out for oxoplastics. These are not compostable. They're neither bio-based nor biodegradable. It's basically normal polyethylene with a few biodegradable fillers. So they fragment. They do not compost nor they do biodegrade. They disappear from site, but not from the environment. They hamper both mechanical recycling because they degrade in time, and composting because they fill compost with fragments of polyethylene. It's basically the scientific method to produce microplastics, and so it's one of the most dangerous proposals and false claims. Worth underlining that they have been totally banned in Europe. We know there is a very aggressive strategy now in Asia about oxoplastics. They are being touted as a green and cheap solution, but consider that they have been banned in Europe in the Single-Use Plastics Directive. Totally banned for no use no purpose whatsoever. But in the end of the story, what is our demands on corporations? We want them to reveal how much plastics goes into markets each year. We know part of the picture, but many of the data are still hidden. For many materials made of plastics, we don't know how many, in which markets, and so on and so forth. But also we don't know where do materials go after being collected, and this is the problem related to waste trade coming to Asia most of the times, at least in the past, for the so-called scam recovery. We want them to reduce the amount of plastic produced and packaged, and we want them above all to reinvent how goods are packaged and delivered with new business models, building on durability and reusability of materials to move away from single use for better and more sustainable solutions.